Alright, this is going to be a video chart on Dendrion, ticker DNDN, a biotech stock. We're going to look at a couple different charts of this one, but the reason we want to talk about it is because yesterday it absolutely exploded higher, up by about 40-some% on tremendous volume. This is a 100-day chart, so the volume was as high as it's been in the last 100 days. Let's see. That was the best volume yesterday since August 4th, and on August 4th, that was a downside volume day. So in terms of the upside volume day, meaning volume when the price is rising, that was the best volume to the upside since April 29th, 2009. So anytime you get a volume move like that, you definitely got to pay attention. That's an obvious sign of funds moving in, institutions coming in here, and whatnot. Now, there's a couple different things we want to point out on this chart. You can see that the stock suffered a pretty good gap down in late October, early November from about the $10 level to just under $8. And so with yesterday's massive move, DNDN completely filled this gap. Now, typically you'll have a lot of resistance in these gaps. And you can see that as DNDN tried to move up in the middle of November, it got topped out right here in the middle of the gap. Then again in early December, it got stopped by the gap. Now what's interesting is if you look at these highs of where it failed to get above in November and December, notice where it opened yesterday on the gap up, directly above this previous resistance. So that's a great bullish sign overall. This is a very, very bullish gap higher. And so now the chart is going to have to deal with resistance and likely do some consolidation, as if you look at a longer term chart, if we go out to a weekly chart, let's look at just to give everybody an idea of what type of stock this has been. You can see this stock made an absolutely ridiculous move from $250 all the way up to $40. And there was a great uptrend going on, but like we always talk about, with these great uptrends, you can get sudden drops when the uptrend breaks. And you can see solid uptrend, broke below it, got back above it, but then really struggled with it, and then got rejected by the previous uptrend. So this is why we preach, when uptrends break, you really got to use caution. And sure enough, the stock just absolutely collapsed in August of this year. So what we have now is you want to look at previous areas of support and try and determine where resistance is going to be. So if we look at a 1-year weekly chart, the first resistance that we see is being tested right now. It's this high around $12. Why do we choose that high? Because that's where the first real bounce happened, in our opinion, from a low of $7.81 up to $11.40. That's a nice solid bounce of well over 30%. So you can see that $12 is definitely resistance now, and the high for this week so far is $11.74, so that resistance is coming into play. Now, what's good for the bulls, though, is that volume has been so good this week that even if it doesn't break $12 today or early next week, the volume is constructive where if DNDN can consolidate and find new support between 1075 and 1150, it's then going to set up a really nice pattern to then test that resistance. So where's resistance after $12? Well, we've got this high here, right around, let's see, 1440. We're taking this high from early August. It's 1395 is the high. Why is that our next resistance? Because you have this high here at $12. What's the next high? It was this high here at right around 14. So, remember, this is a weekly chart. So we've got those two resistance levels at 12 and 14. Now, to figure out further resistance, we've got another one of these tremendous gap downs here. Just like this one from 10 down to 7-ish, this one is just massive. I mean, you're talking from $33 down to $11. So, if it can break 14, there's really some interesting resistance here because you don't know where the resistance is going to come into play. For instance, remember this gap down. You didn't really know where the resistance was going to come into play, but it ended up happening around 9.10. Now, if you consider the low of $10 and the high here of $7.70 on that gap down, 9.10 is a little bit above the midpoint of that gap. So, if history would repeat itself, we could then say if it can break 14 and the gap down was from 33 down to 13, the midpoint of that gap down is around $23.50, $24. Excuse me, $22.50 to $23.50 would be around the midpoint. So I'm not saying that DNDN can just go from $14 to $23.50. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm just noting that you want to pay attention to the midpoints of gaps because a lot of times that's where resistance can come into play. Now, if we again look at the weekly chart though and take a longer term view, we can see some support levels on the weekly that might now come into play later on. Now, you say, hey, this was 3 years ago. How can you be paying attention to a level that was 3 years old? What significance does that hold? Well, the fact is a lot of volume still traded there. I don't care when it happened. Volume still traded there in that range, and it traded all the way up there. And we know it was support because after this big run from $8 to 24, 25, it pulled back down to the 19 level. So 19 will be the first level to watch as resistance if it can break above 14. So this is a very interesting chart because if DNDN can keep uptrending here and set up some type of pattern, there's really a big opening in the chart if it can break that $14 level. Now, resistance can always come into play lower than 19, but our point is that technical traders are going to have a hard time figuring out where resistance is exactly, and that makes for a very interesting trade setup, which could really be quite bullish. So, what we want to see now is you want to see the close yesterday of 1062. You want to really see that become support, and you can already see today it's gapping up pre-market, and the low is $11. So you want to see that 1050 to 1125 range, 1150 really become support, and we could get a bullish flag pattern potentially on DNDN. Now, if you want to break it down further and look at an intraday chart from yesterday, you can see just tremendous volume on the upside right at the open, starting at $9, and its low intraday was 1041 after that big spurt. So that's another key level to watch. But clearly you already have somewhat of a flag pattern going on. Now what we mean by a flag pattern is you can draw a pole here. There's your flagpole. And then you've got your actual flag here. You know, so it literally looks like a flag. So if you envision this on the daily, where we're saying that you could see some, here's your pole right here already forming. And now maybe what we'll see is some consolidation in this range, which really would match up well, because if you just look, there's definitely resistance in this $10 to $12 range back from September through November. I mean, you can see clearly the stock struggled in that range. So that would make sense for a flag formation to appear here. So you want to see if volume's going to remain strong. 42 million shares traded yesterday. You want to see volume today of at least 20 million shares at least. And judging by the pre-market activity, already a million shares traded, DNDN appears to be signaling that you are going to get that type of volume. So overall, this is definitely a good chart to keep your eye on. What would change our mind on the bullish trend? Well, you don't want to see a retrace much below that 1050 level or so, and certainly not below $10. If it were to break below $10 after this huge move, then that's a sign of real selling into this pop from all these bag holders, you know, around $40 and $30. But you can see the stock's had a long time to consolidate on the weekly chart, since about August, July. So we're talking about 5 months or so. So it would make sense that this could be the start of a nice bullish run. But, you know, if it does break below $10, which we said we don't want to see happen, then just like this downside gap filled between here and here, now you could be talking about this upside gap filling between here and here, which would be quite the pullback from a high of nearly 12 back down to 750 to 890. So the net takeaway here is look for some consolidation. Watch the volume closely. You want to see it stay strong. Needs to break $12. If it breaks $12, it can get going. 14 resistance after that. Break 14. It's really anybody's guess up to 19 bucks. On the support side, you want to see that 1050 to 1125, 1150 level really start to act as support. Maybe you'll see a flag pattern start to shape up, which would be bullish. Goes below $10. We don't like it. Something's fishy. We don't like that it wouldn't have been able to hold on to these gains, so use caution.